Okay, so here we are starting to talk about the third part of our Evidence for Evolution lecture. So again, just re-emphasizing what we did in the first two lectures. We talked about what evolution is, a little bit about the history, some of the information that Darwin and Wallace both shared when evolution was presented to the Linnaean Society, and then the demand for proof. So the critics complained and said, well, prove it. Show us the evidence. And again, I want to stress to you guys, when you're proving something scientifically, you have to be able to run an experiment and have a scientific method and a hypothesis and collect data and use the data to support or reject your hypothesis. Evolution is considered scientific because all of these things we're doing here can be done experimentally. If I can't design an experiment to prove something, it is not science. It is faith-based. It's a belief and a perspective, but it's not a scientific perspective. So nothing wrong with those perspectives, but just simply it's an apple versus an orange. They're completely different. So the lines of evidence we talked about in the second lecture included the fossil record, and that is continuously adding information. It's continuously being built and supported by more and more fossil evidence. Watch any of the major scientific journals, and there's always new fossil evidence being discovered to help support evolution, the evolutionary theory. We also started talking about anatomical evidence. Our basic physical anatomy is support for evolution. When we look at homologous structures, same structure across a multitude of species, that shows relatedness, that shows similarity. So the ancestral species had this structure, and then as that ancestral species diverged and evolved into different new species, some of those things were retained. Some of those basic structures were retained, and that's why we see them present in species today. So vestigial structures was the second one we started talking about. These are structures that have no apparent function. So, we don't use them, but our ancestors used them. So the hip bones in a whale. Whales don't need legs, they don't need hips, but the ancestor to the whale did. It used to walk on land. It was a four-legged land-based mammal millions and millions and millions of years ago. So the whale perspective, I want you guys to think about things like seals, otters, dolphins, etc. So think about that progression. If you're an otter, you got four legs, but you're very adaptable in the water. Go to the seal, four limbs, flippers, hips, but not really good on land, but very, very good in the water. And then you move into the whale. Terrible on land, excellent in the water. Again, that's the idea with these vestigial structures. They show that these features were present in our ancestors, but not today. So if we don't need them, if we never had them, why would they be there if they have no function? They're there because they're leftovers from our previous ancestors. And then our third structure is what's called analogous structures. Now these are structures that are similar in function, but they're derived from different ancestors. Okay, so wings of birds, wings of butterflies, very, very different ancestors, but a common function. So what we see is with analogous structures, a lot of times those structures evolved because of environmental influence. Those species adapting to similar environmental niches, but again, not coming from a common ancestor. So it shows relatedness, it shows environmental influence because you have a similar function for your structures. Right, so two main lines of evidence, just to reemphasize: fossil record, anatomical. Darwin laid this out in the 1850s. A lot of skepticism. Understandable. Let's keep looking for more evidence. Let's take a look at embryological development. if you look at the early embryo of lots of vertebrates, animals with backbones, this early embryo is very, very similar. In some cases, you couldn't tell the difference between a chicken embryo and a person's embryo in early developmental stages. Now, how they progress from one stage to the next, to the next, to the next is identical in all these different species. Different genes control this. Those genes regulate embryological development. Why are those genes there? Because all of these things have a common ancestor in which that DNA was present. Those genes got passed from one generation to the next, to the next, to the next, and is present in all these species today. So embryological development is a third line of evidence that helps support the evolutionary theory. The fourth line, and this is something Darwin never saw, never looked at, it was beyond what they were doing back in the 1850s, is molecular evidence. Okay, so consider all the work you guys did with DNA and transcription and translation and DNA going from the basic genetic code into eventually a protein. That's universal. That's across all life. It doesn't matter if you're a fish or a person or an apple tree. It's the same process. That earliest genetic information and that process was present in the earliest ancestors of all eukaryotes. To be able to go through that, that's a core piece of information in the genetic code. So we look at molecular evidence, and that is an incredible line of support for the theory of evolution. Again, Darwin didn't have this available. He said, let's look at fossils, look at anatomy, let's look at some of these other features. But molecular continues to support evolution. So the estimation with molecular evidence is that 1% difference in DNA equals approximately 5 to 6 million years of evolutionary divergence. Okay, so if you look at two species that are 1% different in their genetics, the estimation is they had a common ancestor about 5 to 6 million years ago. We will revisit this when we get into hominid evolution and look at human evolution. Okay, so that is a rough estimation. So why did you inherit, or why do we have a 1% difference? Mutations accumulate over the course of generations, and it takes roughly that 5 to 6 million years for 1% difference, 1% different mutations to accumulate in a species over that amount of time. Okay, so we got that line of evidence. Another line that Darwin did actually propose, he coined this idea, it's called biogeography. This is the geographic distribution of living organisms across Earth. All right, so why do we see armadillos in North America and pangolins in Africa and anteaters in Oceania and a giant anteater in South America? Well, they're distributed in those patterns because of where they are on the continents and how the continents have drifted apart. So the idea was when the Earth was one big landmass, the continents were all pushed together, the ancestor to all these things evolved. As the continents drifted away, these groups started evolving differently because they had different environmental conditions, different temperatures, different amounts of sunlight, different seasons, different predators, different food sources, etc. And that's what drove them to evolve differently. But we do still see commonality between all of them because of that common ancestry. So biogeography, or the distribution of life on Earth, helps us look at the relatedness and the similarity between species, supports evolution. Now, sometimes species will evolve through a process called convergent evolution. This is when they develop a similar body plan in response to the environment. Okay, so look at all these different marine predators: sharks, tunas, dolphins, ichthyosaurus. These are all marine predators that have a very, very similar body plan. Oh, sorry about that. I keep doing that. They're streamlined, tapered nose, elongated bodies, big tail fin propels them. They're fast moving. Those features, those traits, all evolved in response to the environment. These guys don't have that close of a relative. We got a mammal over here. These guys are bony fish for the tuna, cartilaginous fish for the shark, and then your ichthyosaurus, prehistoric type of fish. So they're all evolving similarly because that environment. To move through water, to swim through the ocean, and to be a predator, you have to have these features and these traits. So the body plan evolves based on the environment, and that can cause different groups to evolve similarly. So again, this is what we refer to as convergent evolution. Now, Darwin presented these ideas, came up with, here's my support, here's my reasoning, here's my logic, and lots of people accept it, but we also see lots of people that don't. There are still critics to Darwin's proposal, critics to evolution, people who deny it, who do not support it. The number one thing you will hear is people say evolution is just a theory, in reference to we don't know what it is, it's still a guess. In science, and this goes back to the first lectures, in science, theory is something supported. Okay, so what I really want to make sure you guys are comfortable with are the 7 principal objections to evolution, and how would you counter them. Okay, whether you believe in evolution or not, you still need to be able to counter this as a biologist, because your jobs as biologists revolve around evolutionary theory. If you're going into medicine, that's all based on evolutionary theory. If you're going into conservation, environmental issues, evolution is the core concept behind all these things. So when somebody says evolution is just a theory, well, so is the germ theory. What makes us sick? Things make us ill. Are we guessing about viruses? Are we guessing that bacteria make us sick? No, we pretty much know that you get sick from viruses and bacteria and fungi and protozoans and parasites, etc. We're not guessing. So when you go to the doctor and they say, oh, you have the flu, you don't ask them, are you sure? Are you just guessing? No, they know because of the germ theory. That's the same perspective with evolution. It's not guessing. It is something that is supported. And we have all those lines of evidence to support it. Okay, so another objection. There are no fossil intermediates. So there's no fossil showing A turning into B and into C and into D. That's wrong. We have plenty of fossil intermediates. We have all sorts of fossils in the fossil record. So I would encourage you guys, look at the fossil record. Now, do we have every single fossil of every single species? Not at all. That's not realistic. We're never going to do that. But we have a very robust and solid fossil record for many, many different areas of the entire diversity of life on Earth. So fossil intermediates are there. There's obviously some groups that we may never find fossils for. They don't fossilize. But that's not a real solid objection to say there's no fossil intermediates to show proof that these groups connect. The third criticism or objection: life is too complex for natural processes. Okay, so this can't happen naturally. That's the thought. this isn't possible for this to occur naturally.